Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diaries. Dear Diary, welcome world to the Indigo Diaries, and welcome to our Series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD through others and our own experiences. And very excited yet again. I can't believe I'm having another guest yet again. 2023 has really been a guest year. And I always at the start of the session that I'm so excited to meet and get somebody on here and meet new people, because I just really love exploring and being curious in conversations. You know, I am neurodivergent. But today is a topic and a person that's quite close to what I do and an expert in the field that I can really relate to. And this is the first time where I've really had somebody that with our niches are very similar. And that makes me very even more excited than I usually am. So welcome to Frank.
Hello.
So today we're doing a start in the conversation where we start a conversation about a topic of interest and we dive deep into it. So let me tell you a bit about Frank. Frank is a formally accredited neurodiversity coach with lived experience of dyspraxia and ADHD. His diagnosis came later in life at 23 and 30, respectively, only after graduating university and several years of professional experience in the corporate world. Without realising it, he'd spent 30 years learning the importance of self-management the hard way, without having any coaching of his own or anyone to turn to with his questions. This in turn triggered his decision to retrain to be a neurodiversity coach for people with ADHD, autism, and other neurological disorders. Nowadays, he works primarily with younger adults of 16 to 35 on helping them better understanding themselves, unlock their strengths to reach their goals. So very close to kind of my heart and the area that I like too. So I always start to ask this first question. Oh, I forgot to say, if you want the full bio, please look in the description below. So Frank, tell me, what's your, it says a bit in your bio, but what's your connection to this area and this field with your own experience?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on. Really excited to be here. Yeah, and I think when we first met and we first spoke, I think we first sort of instantly bonded over, similar sort of age groups and similar age groups that we coach as well. And for me personally, as you sort of touched on there in the intro, is that I had known for almost my whole life that I think differently and that I sort of have all these ideas and loads of sort of fun and positivity and optimism and sort of think, solutions to things that perhaps other people weren't seeing. And I sort of liked being creative in that way. And yet it came with a lot of sort of anxiety and frustration and emotion and challenges at times. And as you said there, I wasn't diagnosed with my ADHD until I was 30. And I thought, well, I can't go back in time. I can't change that. I can't change how I felt. But I can change, hopefully, other people's experiences of living with ADHD, of that sort of self-acceptance, that sort of change, how it can impact your life, how you can master it. And there are loads of positives as well as challenges. And so, yeah, I thought the next best thing, if I can't go back in time to when I was 15, 16, the next best thing I can do is work with that sort of younger age group. So like you, a lot of my coachees, a lot of my clients are sort of 16 to 25, really varies. But yeah, I love it. Wouldn't change it for the world.
I love that. And it's that thing of we had a very similar ethos when we first met about that kind of that age group. But I'm curious there, going back, what difference could it have made if you'd had a coach back then?
Do you know what? That's a really interesting question because I've never even thought about it. What difference could it have made? I think something that I mentioned the last time we spoke was the change curve, is this sort of Kubler-Ross model of change. I'm sure you'll put in the notes. I sort of love it. I live by it. I mention it to a lot of people, particularly at their point of diagnosis. What was really interesting is in my case, I just dived straight from, what is at the beginning. There's shock, denial, anger, that sort of thing. And in my case, I just dived straight into acceptance. It just suddenly everything made sense. I know for a lot of people that's not the case. and they are perhaps in that shock phase or in that denial phase or perhaps anger phase. And I think one of the reasons that was so quick to jump into that acceptance phase was because I'd sort of spent the last 30 years processing it without really realizing that I was processing it, and sort of working out the hard way. Oh, okay, this works for me. This doesn't. I'm really good at this, and yet I'm terrible at that. And sort of working out my little cheat sheets, I guess, for myself, in the home, in the workplace, at school, to try and get there. So yeah, I think I'd sort of been managing it by accident. And so what would have Coach have done? It would have maybe sped that process up, I think. It would have maybe sort of made that self-acceptance, self-compassion piece that our good friend ADHD Alex is really big on, Alex Campbell, a bit easier. And I think it would have saved a lot of frustration along the way, but equally, it's made me the coach I am today to have gone through that. So yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I like that. It's like appreciating that where you have come, you were diagnosed at 30, but you jumped into that acceptance, which is amazing to go into that kind of, I can do this now, this makes sense. And I know for me, and I did the exact same. I went into this, I didn't really worry about the past because I was just so happy with this knowledge that I'd got ADHD. It was like, right, what can I do? So what were you finding in, I know like I kind of got my thing, but I'm curious, like with that age group, kind of that 14 to 18 or 25, like what are you noticing are the biggest challenges with ADHD?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one. I think for one, compared to certainly when we were that age, there's 1,000,001 social media platforms that I know I'm sort of outing our age here. Sorry, Tasha. but Facebook didn't come out till I was 17, 18. So it sort of gives you an indication, to be sort of 13 and growing up with TikTok and like 7 other social media accounts exposes you to a world that no other generation has really had before at that age. So I think one is sort of coming to terms with real information versus misinformation, sort of making sure, are you following sources that are fact-checked and fact-based? That's one. I think secondly is to do with that a degree of sort of social stigma. Being a teenager, being a young adult is not fun at the best of times. There's a lot of change in life as your sort of body changes and you're perhaps changing environments as well. And so that sort of social acceptance of like, can I talk about this? Can I share this? Do I feel comfortable? Who am I? What am I about? There's a lot of sort of anxiety around that in general at that age. And then, now I speak to parents all the time, as I'm sure you do, that sort of say, oh, I'm worried I'm too late. And I remind them, whilst it's not for me to tell you how to parent or anything like that, my diagnosis wasn't to 30, and my mum's came as a result of mine in her 60s. So whilst collectively we'll all do the absolute best for their child and your child and whoever, I'm a really big believer that it is what you make of it, and I would have loved to have found out about it at sort of 14, 15, to have given me that extra sort of 15-year head start that I eventually ended up getting.
But then I suppose that's what you're doing, and what we do for other people, right, is to help them get that head start. And because the earlier the better, but it is what you make of it, right? If you get the diagnosis at 10, 20, 50, 90, I heard the other day,
wow.
It's just about, right, what can you do with it now?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a huge amount of it is sort of like figuring out what it means for you. Could be goals, it could be life, it could be relationships. I know that sort of understanding it has really helped relationships with the people around me in terms of how I communicate things, how we communicate to each other. I'm curious actually to know about your experience, Tash, and sort of what you think. I'm turning the tables here, but what's something that you see a lot in terms of the teenagers and younger adults?
Well, you threw me off now. I find a bit like what you said, like I think the ADHD challenges specifically and like the neurodivergent challenges are difficult. And I think I call it the impacts of having kind of being neurodivergent in this world that I find are a lot harder to cope with. Because I kept hearing you use the word anxiety. right? And that anxiety and acceptance around being neurodivergent and around needing to do things a different way, I find is a lot harder, and having that compassion acceptance a lot harder to deal with than, I don't know, being disorganized, getting to your homework together. The stress of having to get your homework together or doing it in a different way, or accepting that you might need more prompts or you might need to do it in a different way to your friends, is what I find huge. And I know for me personally, that was probably even more impactful than the actual being the ADHD kind of symptoms or challenges themselves.
Yeah, and I completely agree with everything you just said. It's fascinating. And the frustrating thing can be as well when you're doing something that will work, but because it's done in a different way, or people sort of don't understand it's slightly unorthodox, they're like, what are you doing? What is that? And sometimes you just say, like, trust the process. I know I'll get there, or I'll get you what you want. It just might not be the way that you would have done it. But I'm pretty sure it would be just as good, if not as better.
Yeah. And it's the pressures of the social side as well, of like being seen as different and being seen as because I know a lot of teenagers just want to fit in. Right? We just want to fit in, have that group of friends to get it. But in order to do that, we have to suppress a lot of what kind of our differences and what our greatness is. What do you find with kind of the social element with teens with ADHD?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I think a lot of it touches on that sort of social media piece that we talked about. Certainly compared to even just a few, couple of years ago, there's so much more sort of presence now on social media of neurodiversity, both sort of good and bad. As I said, I was a little bit wary about the misinformation that people might stumble across, and the fact that sort of anyone can build themselves as a social media creator, but not necessarily have the background or have the lived experience. And I think for me, the training as well as the lived experience is really important. I think having one alone is not enough. But for me, I see a lot as well about medication and things like that, or movies sort of glamorizing something or demonizing something. A lot of people I come across, they'll have watched the movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper, and they'll think medication is going to make them like that, and they're going to sort of unlock 150% of their brain, and life will be okay. But as whilst everyone's experience is different, and I wouldn't ever give medical advice on that, it's a good example of how something can be really sort of taken with and run with in a particular direction that might then sort of steer people in a particular way that they might not have otherwise gone down themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's really crucial what you said there about kind of that, like it's almost like that stereotype of what ADHD is in the world, or the meds or this or that, which then I find that a lot of teens then don't want to admit they've got it. So it's almost like that, or I don't want to get help, or I don't want to go, when you go to uni, you get the DSA. I don't want that because I don't want to appear like I need help because of the stereotypes or the misinformation that's actually being fed out about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously you've got the sort of different dynamics as well between generations as well. So some younger people might be more accepting, as we said, going back to that sort of change curve. Other times it's sometimes led by the parent. Sometimes it might be that one can see it in the other but not in themselves. As we know, there's a sort of strong genetic link with neurodiversity and ADHD and these sort of things. So often I sort of say, if someone comes to me and says, oh, my son is ADHD or whoever, I'll say, without sort of telling you or being able to prescribe you or anything like that, diagnose you, is it possible that it could be elsewhere in your family? And because I know certainly, as I said, within my family, sort of half of us are a particular way, shall we say. And when I got my diagnosis, it led to my mum's, my uncle, we sort of looked at my grandma, and it was just really clear, like, oh, that's sort of what this is, right? That's sort of given us a real sense of understanding. It also explained why our bonds were so close, because I think we sort of understood that we were different, even within our kind of close clan, as of our family. And so that can be quite challenging for families. It can be quite polarizing. I'm sure you've seen it all as well, where sort of So it can be really big stages of denial on one side or the other, or both. And as a coach or as someone in this sort of space, it's never our job to tell anyone what to do or how to react. It's really just a case of sort of being there when they need you.
And it is a lot, and I think there's a lot about the individual, but it is a lot for everybody, right? It is to get that diagnosis, and then everybody in that family has got to kind of figure out their own, because it's a change for not only the person with ADHD to figure that knowledge out, but also the whole family. What like dynamics do you notice when like somebody gets diagnosed at like, I don't know, young adult or teen?
Yeah, it's interesting because as we sort of touched on in both of our cases, we sort of felt that everything made sense, and it suddenly becomes all you want to talk about in lots of cases. And so there's definitely an element of that in which families or individuals are sort of processing that together. That is this particular challenge that we have related to ADHD, or is that just you? Is that personality thing? And so, you know, I'm always wary as well of sort of blaming everything on ADHD or on a particular condition, because I don't think it's an excuse to sort of hide behind. You know, in terms of, I don't think it excuses bad behavior, but it gives us a reason for understanding ourselves. Like, okay, this is my tendency, this is my sort of where I might go, and bringing that to the forefront, having a really open, honest conversation, explaining like, actually, the reason I did that was because I thought this, and then having someone across the table say, well, actually, that's not at all what I meant when I said this, really helps you then navigate and build the bridge of that communication, so you sort of end up in the place where you both want to be, whether that's a, you know, mom, dad, sibling, parent, godparent, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever.
Yeah, I think that's really key there. And what I was thinking about earlier when you were talking is like, a lot of parents come to me, I don't know about you, but they say like, what's the difference between ADHD and being a teenager? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. It's funny because I never knew I had ADHD when I was a teenager, so I have never actually given that much thought. What I'd say to that is that, you know, being a teenager is a complex period of life anyway.
Yeah.
And having a diagnosis around that time can, in one hand, be, you think, oh, a bit of a curse, like, oh, I'm already going through teenagerhood and puberty and all these things, and I've got this diagnosis to grapple with. On the other hand, it could be a sort of blessing where you're like, well, actually, because I'm going all through all that, is this just another one that I can add in and I'll sort of go through it together, and I don't have to go through it twice. And different people will react in different ways. In terms of what it's like to just be a teenager, who can really say, because no two people have ever been the same teenagers. So yeah, it's not something I would encourage people to hide behind, but equally I would invite people to think about what it means for them in that broader sense.
Yeah, and I think that's really crucial. Like, what is the experience like for you? And like sometimes it gets to the point where it's like, oh, it's ADHD, so I've got to like not excuse that, or you know, and that sort of thing. And we don't want to, it's an explanation, we don't want to use it as an excuse, but it's that thing of what is the teen and what is the ADHD, but also what is their experience of it. And I find that sometimes people, I know I did when I first diagnosed with ADHD, all I wanted to talk about was ADHD, and all I wanted to do is talk about ADHD. And like my partner said to me, like, Cash, like ADHD is not a person. Like, we got to stop that. Like, everything, you're Tash, and ADHD is part of you, but it's not all of you. And I was like, oh yeah. And it's that thing of what's your experience versus what's the ADHD's experience, right? It's that it's trying to take from all that encompassing thing and really going deep into that open, honest conversation.
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, isn't it? Because we might, even the language we use differs at different times. So we might use different language at different times. And, you know, sometimes you'll hear me or other people say like, oh, I have ADHD, or as an ADHDer, or, you know, and I know within the autism community as well, where I know you're much more sort of able to advise on this, but I know the language piece is really big in the community about, you know, is it I am autistic or do I have autism, and these sorts of things. And I think they can be really powerful that, to be honest, I'd probably not given it enough thought and effort until relatively recently to really think about the language I'm using, sort of not reinforcing the stereotypes either way.
It's like what you said earlier about it's your own definition. It's your own experience, right? If you're a teen and older, it's your experience, and then what that means to you, and then what you want to do about that, right? And it is about, it is your own.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen some really beautiful examples of people really capturing that. A couple of fellow coaches of mine, quite visual in nature, and I've seen their sort of paintings and visual representations. Another one I know writes beautiful poetry, and they sort of capture what it means for them in that way. And I think that's really sort of beautiful way of capturing, what is often we feel as like a part of ourselves that maybe isn't often expressed in the easiest way. So it goes to show that it can be sort of expressed in a different way.
Yeah, and that's quite a nice humble ending for the first part. And we're going to come back after the break, and we're going to carry on talking about maybe going into the adulthood and what it's like after the teenage year, because that's where things really start to crumble with the life stuff, and we'll talk about how ADHD impacts that. And we're out.
If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out.
And we're back. And we actually didn't do too bad in the break today. Why usually I end up talking for 10 minutes, but I think my awareness is growing about the break times with guests. So we're back with Frank. If you've not listened to the first half, rewind now, because we were having a really good in-depth conversation about kind of teenage and what it's like to have ADHD at that age. And now we were kind of talking about kind of going into that adulthood. So what do you find a kind of key impact of ADHD when kind of we get past that school part?
Yeah, so like many other sort of neurological conditions, ADHD impacts different people in different ways, and typically ADHD is something that's seen as being worse as a child, but I actually think I got worse as an adult or as a teenager. In terms of focus, I know was definitely one. May or may not be tied into the Facebook coming in when I was a later teenager as well, like I mentioned earlier. But other things as well, sort of just day-to-day organization, and as your expected accountability goes up as an adult, you don't necessarily always feel that well equipped to deal with it. You've suddenly, 1 minute you're at school as a child and you're sort of drawing pictures, and the next minute you're writing 1,000-word essays, and the next minute you're doing your A levels, and that's sort of tough. And then the next minute you're at university and you're thinking, hang on a minute, I've got to walk 40 minutes to get somewhere I don't know. I've got to pick up these books I don't know anything about from a place I don't know, and extrapolating that into terms of paying bills and all these other things as you get older. That for me, that jump was just so big. I really wasn't prepared for it, and it sort of made me grow up quite fast. Again, as we said earlier, sort of the hard way, so to speak. But yeah, I think nowadays more than ever, there's just so much complexity around. You need an app for everything, which means you need a password for everything, which means you need to never lose your phone ever. And if you do, your life is over. And this can be quite a lot to navigate when, as you said, you're growing up and you've already got so many other things to worry about.
I think that is a really good point about the complexity, right? Because I find someone said to me the other week, I thought it was really funny, like when you're almost like in cotton wool when you're at school. And I'm not saying that school is easy with neurodiversity, because it is not easy. But when you're in cotton wool, like you know, if you've got good support systems, your school are good, you know, you've got more external structure, external accountability, so you don't need that much autonomy or responsibility. And then boom, you get to uni, or you get to a job, or you whatever choices you make, and it's that I've got to be responsible for myself, I've got to clean up, do this, and it's so complex for the ADHD mind.
Yeah, completely. I have never worked in a bar, but I always thought like that would be my worst nightmare, because I've got phenomenal long-term memory, but absolutely terrible short-term memory. Just ask my partner, who's always, on my case because I forgot something she said a minute ago, and I'm trying, I promise. But something like a bar job, for example, where there's so much change, so much transition, so much sort of interaction that might only last 30 seconds. All those sort of student type jobs that are quite high churn, quite a lot of exposure to new things. There's a lot to take on in the short period of time. And as you said, just sort of 1 minute you're wrapped up in cotton wool, and then the next minute you're expected to, pay your taxes on time. And by and large, I'm sure we all sort of get there in the end. But at that sort of period comes with a lot of uncertainty, doesn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of stress. I know I worked in a bar, lasted 3 hours trial, and then cried in the toilet and was like, no. They were like, do you want the job? I was like, no. I was like coming out crying, like never went back to that place ever again after a 3-hour trial. It is just the worst thing. What do you find like when they come out of that age group, that 18-year-olds? Like there's just so many choices of what to do next. What do you find with that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's that sort of paradox of choice, isn't there? That you would think as a human being that the more choice, the better. But it's sort of one of the reasons when you get onto a plane and find watching a movie a lot easier than when you're at home, is because on the plane there might be 20 movies, and on Netflix there are like 50,000, and you spend an hour and a half choosing the movie and then 10 minutes watching it and decide you don't like it. So yeah, I think there's definitely something around being constructively limiting, I guess, in terms of your options. And I know that might sound negative, but actually I think because we as ADHD brains sort of love lots of things and get really excited by things and have a new hobby a lot of the time, we're sort of starters, not finishers. A lot of the time, I'm generalizing, of course, not always. But I think there's something around, for every yes is like recognizing what I'm saying no to. So if I'm going in this particular direction, like actually it's going to come at a cost of X. And it could be time spent with people, it could be time traveling, it could be money, it could be, that cost could come in different things, in different ways. But yeah, thinking to ourselves like, okay, I might not necessarily want to do this forever, and that's absolutely fine. But can I sort of limit myself to 2 or 3 choices and go with the best one of that, rather than stressing about trying to do all million and then not getting anywhere?
Yeah, that paralysis. But something I find as well, just an idea that came from when you were talking there, is the expectation. So like, I know for me, when I was that age, it was expected to go to university and then get a job and then stay in that job for 45 years, get your pension, get a house, get married, have kids. I've done none of those. I have done none of those things. But it's that thing of the expectations and what that can do, and why a lot of people do think of so many choices.
Yeah, and that, like you said there about the long careers, is a really interesting one. So in my previous life, before I became a coach, I worked for lots of different food and drink brands, and you can have a look at my CV, it's on LinkedIn. But the reason I mention that is because pretty much like clockwork, sort of every 18 months or so, I would want to move role, and people would, after a while, they'd say, well, whoa, what's wrong so that you're moving every 18 months? And I would say, no, it's nothing wrong. I'm just ready for a new challenge. I'm excited about this, and never wanting to stagnate. And actually I saw that as a positive. I was like, the reason that I'm in this interview, the reason that you sort of are interested in me, is because of my previous experience, and the fact that I've worked at lots of different places and had lots of different jobs makes me, I think, a really good fit for the role. And so there was an interesting dynamic of people trying to have both sides. Like, they don't want you to move around forever, like they want you to stay there for a long time, but they equally want your experience that you've got from moving around loads. And so for me, there was something around becoming really comfortable with the fact that that's what I'm going to do and not apologizing for it either.
Yeah, and I love that you made that, just the way you said that, you made that into a positive experience, right? Rather than, oh, he's moved around because he got ADHD, he gets bored, oh no, he can't keep a job, to, oh, I've actually got a lot of vast experience, of turning it more into a strength and working with yourself versus working against yourself, and working with your own expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of took some time to get to that sort of narrative in my own mind. But once I got there, I realized that actually there is a lot of positive coming out of this.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Sorry, I was lacking trance there. No, because it's so true that a lot of people with ADHD, that they spend a lot of time going, oh no, I need to do it like this. But then I suppose that comes back to what we were talking about with teenagers earlier. Got to do it in a certain way, because I don't know, on TikTok, people say you've got to do it like this, or you've got to go to uni to get a good job, or all this miscommunication where we just need to look inside ourselves.
Yeah, completely. I saw a fantastic talk the other day by Samantha Hugh. She's amazing. She does a lot of work around sort of ADHD and women in particular. My mum and I went together, which was a load of fun. And she had, I think really early on in her presentation, she had a Venn diagram, so 3 circles of like training, work and education as one, empowerment on the other side, and then sort of bridging the 2 worlds as that middle one where, and I thought that was just really beautiful way of sort of summarizing exactly the journey that so many of us coaches have gone on, and so many people with their own ADHD, outside of the world of coaching, have gone on in terms of bridging those 2 things of learning about what it means for you and how to, own the narrative, but then equally making sure you're doing it in a way that's sort of empowering and educational and sort of, right.
Yeah, so it's almost like doing it your own way, but then still kind of encompassing that kind of you moving forward and doing what you need to be doing. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's like, so something comes up there, it's like doing the washing, right? I know this is going to sound very random. Doing the washing is empowering, but it is got something that's got to be done, right? It's got to be done, but you don't have to do it when people go, just do it. You don't have to do it where you put it on, then as soon as it finishes, you're there, you take it out, then you put it on, and then you fold it so immaculate, and then it goes away. Like, it has to be done, but you've got to find it empowering and doing it in your own way.
Yeah, and there's a sort of common belief, I guess, that action or output sort of comes from motivation. So I need to be motivated and then I can get this done. And actually, a lot of the time it's the other way around. Is like, I've just folded 1 t-shirt. That action has created the motivation that actually there's a few more to go, but I've done one. So like, that's enough to get me motivated, and I'm just going to whip through these in no time, and then I can get on with whatever. That was a big realization for me as well, actually. It's like, you don't always need to be planned for everything. Sometimes you just got to bite the bullet, and it might be a bit rough around the edges or whatever, but getting going is often just what you need to sort of keep going, actually, even though it doesn't feel like it to begin with.
Yeah, I like the word momentum versus motivation, right? When you get the momentum, then the motivation incentive comes from that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and actually, I very nearly call my business sort of centered around momentum, like something around momentum. I'd sort of spent ages on it, and I just couldn't quite work it out. But so in the end, I settled for something completely different. But I'm like you, I love the word momentum. I think, particularly with, our ADHD minds and sort of getting rolling and what we know about procrastination and things like that. Actually, momentum can be such a helpful, positive thing, and that's why so much of what I've talked about and you've talked about today is about sort of involving other people as well in a really sort of positive way to get momentum for everyone's benefit.
Yeah. What do you find, like, I'm going to bring momentum into this now. Why not? What do you find stops people's momentum in that young adult age group?
A lot of the time, unfortunately, I think it's a self-doubt. It's a lack of self-belief. We talk a lot about RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, so that sort of heightened reaction to what we perceive as negative feedback or criticism. And I think that can play a part in it. So, you know, maybe if weight loss is your goal, or if work is your goal, whatever, and you've sort of been seeing progress, and then it might just take one small thing, and that sort of puts you off. I remember a sort of small, trivial but real example is that I'd been learning to juggle. I was traveling with some juggling balls, and I was rubbish. I was rubbish. But the point was, I was doing it while I was traveling, and I sort of figured if I try it over a period of time, I'll get there eventually. And I was getting to a point where I was slightly better, and I could have 3 in the air vaguely. And then someone said to me, "Yeah, you're rubbish," and that was it. And I never picked them up again. I sort of gave them away to a little, to a little child. So that's an example, I think, of the momentum. And it can be so small and it can be big, and it doesn't really matter which. And I think, looking at that example, I would quite like to continue to learn how to juggle. But it is a good sort of real parallel of the other things that we might experience as a teenager or younger adult going through a lot of change.
Yeah. And I find that, I don't know about you, I think the juggling one's a brilliant example, is that a lot of that, yet again, comes from expectations and that thing of you've got to do it this way and you've got to do it for this amount of time, and other people's expectations that we sometimes bring onto ourselves, and then that creates the doubt.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I'm not massive on social media. One of the reasons I'm not is because of exactly what you've just said. I think there's a real culture of celebrating sort of amazing skill, or recognizing people who are truly experts, but there's not a culture of acknowledging the steps that they took to get there. And I find that really disheartening. Like, there are so many people who'd love to be amazing footballers, magicians, jugglers, coaches, whatever field, scientists, whatever field you want to be in, who are put off because they see people's end result and they're sort of judging where they are now, maybe at the beginning of their journey, based on where other people are at the end of theirs, or after sort of thousands of hours of practice. And I think there's not enough recognition in society for how much people are trying, or how trying is important, is an important skill that we've sort of lost the sight of. You see a lot of people with like 2 million followers, and they've got these amazing like travel videos or drone videos or whatever hobby you might be into, and you think, oh, I'm never going to start editing videos because I'll never be as good as that. But you're sort of forgetting that they've probably spent a huge amount of time to get there. And I feel that's a real shame that it's we're put off for that reason.
Yeah, because you can't do it enough. What's coming to me is like, it's like when I started kind of coaching, I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, because you'd see all these coaches like, oh, I've got these clients, and I'd be like, oh no, no. But then when you turn that noise off, that it's just your own expectations. And I always used to say, like with this podcast, if I get one person listening, then that's worth it, because one person might have, I don't know how do I say change their life, but one person might have learned something or got something from it. And that's why I don't look at my numbers. And people are like, oh, you need to look at, no, I don't, because I know that it will put me off if I do.
Yeah, I speak to so many people who are who work for themselves in different sort of industries and all sorts of things, creative ones like musicians and whatever. And often they say that once you make your passion your job, it stops being fun, because, as you said, they're starting to have to pay the rent on it or whatever it might be. And the reason they started in the first place was because they loved it. And as you said, if you start getting distracted by the numbers, it can sort of change your behavior in a way that maybe you don't feel so comfortable with or want to do. Yeah.
And that goes back into this teenage and the young adult. If I don't know, someone says, oh, you need to go to uni, but really you wanted to do, I don't know, an apprenticeship. And it's like, oh, I'll have to go to uni because that's what everyone wants me to do. And then you stop doing what you want to do and try and do what everybody else wants. Or you go into it and then you quit halfway because you can't, I don't know, get your first assignment in the way that everybody else needs to. And what I'm hearing throughout this whole conversation is just about kind of what's your own experience with ADHD, and what are your own expectations?
Yeah, and you touched on there, so that early career, whether it's like apprenticeships or anything like that, it was a good way of just trying things, right? Getting a job, there's absolutely opportunity to go to uni later in life if that is something you want to do. But I think looking back at how I grew up, there was it wasn't like I was put under specific pressure or anything, certainly not by my family or anything like that. But there was just never a scenario in any of my sort of friends, family, broader school contexts or anything of this is what you might do if you don't go to uni. There was just never that option, because it was just so ingrained in you that you would go. It was more just a case of which one are you going to.
Yeah.
And I think the advantage now that younger adults have is, like, because we're so even more connected, and there's things that didn't even exist 5-10 years ago. You could make a sort of side hustle, like drop shipping your career if you wanted to, or all these sorts of things that I see people talk about. Don't understand half of them, but I see loads of people having loads of fun and getting loads of success out of it. And that for me is always a good thing, when someone's sort of tried it, bit of fun, and run with it, rather than being forced into whatever it is that they weren't convinced to begin with, and definitely won't be convinced with 3 or 4 or 5 years down the line.
Yeah. And that comes to back to going to school and having to sit there and do it their way, because we're not taught that there's any other option. It's like you've got to be normal, you've got to fit in, you've got to go with the crowd, but actually don't. You can be who you are, do it your own way, obviously in certain things, but it is that thing of going outside the lines.
Yeah, totally agree.
Oh, this has been great. I've learned so much. I wrote so many notes. Every time I speak to someone, I write so many notes. So
likewise,
what are you any kind of your own words, any kind of your own last words to kind of summarize what we spoke about today?
Oh, the pressure. Well, as is usual in our conversations, it sort of went in about 1,000 different directions. But I think if I were to really summarize it, it would be something along the lines of recognizing that there is no one route in life, and that's true for everyone. I often think about the analogy of a sort of 100-meter racer, for example. You think of like the Olympics, and they're all sort of lined up in the same starting point, and there's the same sort of finishing line. And for us, we don't all start in the same place, we don't all end in the same place. And so basing our decisions for ourselves based on the experiences and the judgments of others isn't always going to be that helpful. So for me, it really comes down to sort of carving out whatever opportunities you can for yourself and staying true to yourself along the way.
Oh wow, I'm gonna literally have to write that down. That's brilliant. I'll need to use that on copyright here. So what kind of encouragement are you leaving us with today?
Yeah, so I thought long and hard about this, but I, as weird as it sounds, because it's quite a deep, depressing book. If The Great Gatsby has a phenomenal sort of opening page where they say, the author says, whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. And I think it's such a sort of beautifully sort of sentimental sort of capturing of ADHD can be both a blessing and a curse, or it can feel like a good thing and it can feel like a struggle. And actually, whilst we might sometimes have days where it's okay to feel sorry for ourselves or feel a bit down, actually there are a lot of times when I do things that I couldn't do if I didn't have ADHD. So I'm sort of thankful for that. And yeah, I thought I'd finish on that because it captures what I think are both sides of the coin, shall we say.
Yeah. And we might start, I don't know, a bit behind on the 100 meters, but we might go to 125.
Yeah, exactly. And without sort of derailing you, I think that's exactly it, is that it's easy to get caught up in thinking that we're behind, and actually you don't realize, like, I'm just getting started, but I'm going at a much faster speed and I'm going to be overtaking a lot of people pretty soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, amazing. So I want to know, well, I know where I can find you, but where can listeners find you?
So my website is consciousclarity.co.uk. Nightmare to spell out, lots of C's and S's and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's all about sort of the vision I wanted to leave people with when they have my coaching. So being really conscious and aware and clear in their direction. And on LinkedIn, I haven't got around to the TikTok yet. Maybe one of your young listeners would offer to run it for me or something, but no, just there for now.
Yeah, I'm not on TikTok either. I refuse to download it. I absolutely refuse. But and anything that you didn't notice, it's below in the description. So if you want to find Frank, if you want to find out about coaching or just ask him any questions, then please get into contact.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. So we leave another amazing person and another great episode and an amazing guest expert. And if you're interested in coming on as a guest, you want to pick my brain, have questions, or want to share your experience, then please reach out through our social media avenues and email. Come learn, listen, and experience the world through not my eyes, but our eyes. Why not? And as Frank said, right? Momentum. Keep it going. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes? I think this journey will be the Indigo